One more step, and your kid falls." Victor spoke very softly, his voice even, like he was reminding someone of the time. He stood in the darkness, a lighter clicking, his hand pulling a little girl closer to the edge of the scaffold, wind gusting hard enough to make the metal shriek cold along the spine. No one screamed. No alarm sounded. There was only a missed step waiting to happen, and the chilling sense that if the child slipped, what shattered would not stop with a single body. But only seconds later, just one brief moment, everything flipped. The person standing opposite Victor was not a police officer, not a hero, and held no power at all. He was Alex, a single father, a man who had only stopped at a park to help a child who had lost her mother, and a few hours later realized his own child had been placed on the scale. The moment Alex growled "sign" to save his daughter, he understood the cruelest truth of all. Fear can bend morality faster than any villain ever could. So, who is truly disgusting? Victor, the man who drags children to the edge of death, the system behind him, where power opens doors for violence. Or Alex himself, when he is willing to offer up another child to keep his own alive. If you were Alex, what would you choose in those few seconds? If you were Emma, would you save your child or save the truth? And if you were watching from the outside, would you dare say you would not do the same? If this passage made you uncomfortable, angry, or unable to look away, leave a comment with your choice below, and hit subscribe to keep following stories that force you to face the dark parts of yourself. Late weekend afternoon, the park was crowded in a very familiar way. Narrow paths packed with strollers, long benches full, voices calling to each other mixed with children's laughter. Alex stood behind a chipped metal swing, hands pushing steadily for Sophie. The 5-year-old girl sat firmly on the seat, legs dangling, mouth forming a small smile each time the swing rose high. Alex counted the rhythm with his eyes, with his hands, with habit. He lived by habits like that, actions repeated enough to go unnoticed, steady enough not to disturb a life that was already fragile. Each day of his looked like the day before, and he believed that if he could keep this rhythm, life would not have time to take anything else from him. Sophie turned her head and asked if she could have cake tonight. Alex nodded, said he would buy flour on the way home. A simple answer, no thinking required. He was used to answering his child with certain things he could keep. He did not like making big promises, did not like putting himself in a position where he had to explain. He pushed the swing one more beat. Alex looked around the park, looked at unfamiliar faces, watched an afternoon pass like hundreds of other afternoons. Then his gaze stopped at something out of place. Near the low bushes by the fence, a little girl stood alone. Her dress was dirty at the hem, and the color had faded from being washed too many times. Her hair was not tied neatly, a few strands falling onto her forehead. What caught Alex's attention was her eyes. The girl did not look up, searching for a familiar adult, did not call out, did not cry. Her gaze swept across the crowd, paused at the entrances and exits, as if checking each possible way out. Each time someone moved closer, her shoulders drew in slightly, her hand gripping the edge of her dress. Alex slowed the swing. Sophie kept smiling, unaware of the change. He told himself that maybe the girl's parents were standing somewhere nearby, that children sometimes stood alone for a few minutes. He had seen that before. He had ignored it before. But the uneasy feeling did not fade. It stayed there, quietly, forcing him to look again. The girl turned her head and met Alex's eyes. In just a moment, it was as if she had finished deciding. The girl walked quickly toward him, not running, not hesitating. When she reached him, she stopped, her small hand grabbing Alex's hand. The grip was cold and urgent, tight enough to make him flinch. "Sir," the girl said very softly but fast. Her breath rushed. "I'm lost from my mom. Someone is looking for me. Is Sant?" Alex bent down, about to ask where her mother was, about to ask who was looking. But before the questions left his mouth, he followed the direction of her glance. From the main path, 2 men separated from the crowd. They did not look alike, but the way they walked was identical. Not hurried, not hesitant, moving straight ahead, as if they already knew the destination. They did not speak to each other. Their eyes scanned the playground, stopping exactly where Alex was standing. Alex straightened up. He felt a clear chill run down his spine. Familiar thoughts about responsibility, about finding security, about calling out to ask if anyone had lost a child, all flashed through him quickly and then vanished. In their place came another reflex, rougher and more direct. He picked Sophie up. The child was surprised, arms wrapping around his neck, asking why he was lifting her. Alex did not answer. He held the other girl's hand, felt the small hand trembling slightly, then turned his back on the crowded playground. He did not calculate. He did not weigh right and wrong. He only chose to leave the sightline of the two men before they could get close. They moved quickly toward the cafe beside the park. Alex did not look back, but he knew he was being watched. Not a rushed chase, but a patient following, as if there was no need to hurry because every path had already been accounted for. Sophie leaned close to his ear, whispering to ask what was happening. Alex spoke quietly, said they were going to buy drinks, and told her to stay quiet for a moment. The lost girl stepped closer to him, so close that her arm brushed his hip with every step. When they reached the door, Alex pushed the glass open. A small bell rang out, sharp and clear in the noisy air. Inside the cafe, it was cool, and the smell of coffee and milk mixed. A few people sat scattered around, heads down at their phones, no one paying attention to the three who had just entered. Alex led the two children further inside, chose a table near the door, and stopped. He set Sophie down on the chair. She sat still, eyes wide, not asking anything else. The other girl sat close beside her, hands resting on her thighs, her fingers still trembling. Alex straightened, turning back on instinct. Through the clear glass, the two men stopped right in front of the cafe. They did not come in, did not knock, did not look at the menu posted on the glass. Their eyes went straight inside, stopping exactly where Alex stood. One man tilted his head slightly, as if confirming something. The other stood still, hands in his jacket pockets, his calm posture unsettling. Alex felt his stomach tighten. The sound of the coffee machine hissed behind him, the dry clink of a ceramic cup being set on the counter. Those ordinary sounds did not reassure him. They only made the scene feel wrong, like a piece placed in the wrong position. A very ugly sentence passed through his mind, clear enough to make him uncomfortable with himself. I do not need this. He was not used to getting involved in other people's problems. He was used to lowering his head and walking past troubles that were not his. He could have taken Sophie and left the park the moment he saw the girl standing alone, could have gone home, baked a cake, and kept a small promise to his child. His life had been built to avoid turns like this. The sentence did not disappear. It sat heavy in his head, like a stone just set down. The girl beside him tugged lightly at his sleeve, her voice almost a whisper. Please don't let them see me. Alex did not respond. He placed his hand on Sophie's back, felt the rhythm of her breathing. The child was silent, her back stiff, as if trying to stay calm in her own way. He bent down to her eye level, said they just had to wait a little, then stood up again. Outside, the two men were still there. One glanced at the watch on his wrist, the movement unhurried. The other stepped forward one pace, raised his hand, and tapped lightly on the glass. A short knock, just enough for the sound to carry inside. Alex did not move. The girl beside him curled inward, her head lowered further, her shoulders trembling very slightly. The other people in the cafe continued what they were doing, no one turning around. The cafe door remained closed. Outside, the two men stood directly in front of the glass. Alex was still standing by the glass door when the girl tugged his hand again. This time the grip was weaker, as if she was tired from holding on for too long. He bent down and quietly asked her name. The girl swallowed, her eyes flicking quickly outside before she answered, her voice wavering. My name is Lily. She stopped there, as if the name alone was already enough information for this situation. Alex nodded, gestured for Sophie to stay seated, then asked Lily if she remembered her mother's phone number. Lily nodded, but her hand gripping his sleeve did not let go. They sat close together at the small table. Alex took out his phone, placed it on the table, and slid it toward Lily. The screen lit up, reflecting the tense faces of all three. Lily's hand trembled as she dialed, made a mistake once, stopped, took a deep breath, then dialed again. When the other end started ringing, Lily held the phone with both hands, pressed it tight to her ear, as if loosening her grip even slightly would make the call disappear. Mom, Lily said as soon as someone answered, her voice breaking. I'm at the cafe near the park. Alex turned his face slightly away, giving her space. Sophie watched Lily closely, then softly asked if she was cold. Lily did not answer, only nodded faintly. Alex took off his light jacket and placed it over Lily's shoulders, the movement neat, familiar, the same way he did with Sophie. He said nothing more. The call ended faster than he expected. Lily set the phone down, looked up at Alex, and for the first time, let her eyes rest on him for more than a second. "My mom is coming right now," she said, as if delivering important news. Her hand was still gripping his sleeve, as if her mother's arrival alone was not enough to guarantee safety. Outside, the two men were still there. Alex no longer looked at them. He shifted his chair slightly, blocking Lily's view of the glass door. Sophie leaned her head against his arm, quietly asking if the woman was her friend's mom. Alex answered softly that maybe she was. A few minutes later, a black car pulled up in front of the cafe. It stopped right at the curb, the engine still running, no one turning it off. Alex noticed that immediately. The back door opened, and a woman stepped out so fast she nearly stumbled. She wore a light-colored coat, her hair tied neatly back, her face pale with panic. Her eyes darted around, searching, then locked onto Lily. "There you are," she cried, her voice breaking, hurrying into the cafe. She hugged Lily so tightly that Lily let out a small sound of pain. The woman's arms trembled, tears spilling out, her mouth spilling broken sentences. "Thank you. I'm sorry. Are you hurt?" Lily stiffened at first, then slowly wrapped her arms around her mother, her head pressing into her shoulder. Alex stood up on instinct, about to step back and give them space, but the woman had already turned to him, grabbing his hand quickly. "Thank you," she said rapidly, her voice so rushed she was almost out of breath. "Thank you so much." Alex nodded, said that Lily had been very calm. He was about to add that everything was fine now, that they could go home, but the words stopped when he looked toward the door. The driver of the black car was still sitting in the driver's seat. He did not turn around, did not get out, only stared straight ahead. Two other men stood outside, one positioned close to the cafe entrance, the other standing off to the side, his eyes sweeping quickly over the street, the surrounding windows, the people passing by. They did not look at Lily, did not look at the woman holding her child. Their focus was on other things, as if the child who had just been found was not the center of this scene. Alex clearly felt that mismatch. He was used to seeing relatives frantic when they found a lost child again, used to the mess of emotions. But here, the sense of safety was built too neatly, too orderly. It felt more like a fence than an embrace. The woman pulled Lily back slightly, bent down to her eye level. "Are you hurt anywhere?" she asked, her voice trying to stay calm. Lily shook her head, then glanced toward the door again, her eyes briefly touching the two men outside. Her hand tightened on her mother's sleeve. Alex noticed that. He was about to say something when the woman's phone vibrated in her hand. The sound was short, sharp, cutting through the moment that had just begun to settle. She glanced at the screen, hesitated slightly, then answered. Habit made her put it on speaker, the voice ringing out in the cafe, loud enough for Alex to hear clearly. "Don't run." The man's voice on the other end was low and hoarse, calm to the point of cold. "This city has eyes." The woman went rigid. Alex could see it clearly in the way her shoulders jerked. In the background of the call, a repeated sound rang out evenly, tap, then stop, then tap again, like an invisible knocking rhythm. Lily lifted her head, eyes wide. Sophie gripped Alex's hand tightly. "Where are you?" the woman asked, her voice low, forcing calm. The sound came again, slow and deliberate. "Close enough," the man replied, as if stating something obvious. The woman ended the call. She stood still for a few seconds, then bent down and hugged Lily again. This time, not tightly, but as if trying to steady her own shaking hands. She took a deep breath, straightened up, and turned to Alex. Her face had gone pale, her eyes no longer resting on him, but sliding past him, toward the door, toward the black car, toward the people already in position. "We have to go now," she said very quickly, her voice low, not giving anyone time to ask. "It's not safe here." Alex opened his mouth, about to say that Lily was already with her mother, that everything could end here, but Sophie squeezed his hand lightly, and Lily also pulled her mother's hand closer. Alex looked at the two children, then at the woman in front of him. He did not ask who she was. He only saw a mother who had just found her child and immediately knew that she still could not stop. Outside the glass, the driver had opened the car door. The two men stood on either side, their eyes fixed on the cafe exit. The woman placed her hand on Lily's shoulder, pulled her close, then looked at Alex again. "Please," she said, not as a plea, but as an urgent push. "Come with us." Unquote. Alex looked at Sophie, looked at Lily, then looked toward the door. The black car was still running, waiting. He had not answered yet when Lily looked up at him, her voice very small. "Please don't leave me here." Alex took a deep breath, nodded once. The woman turned and hurried toward the door, her hand gripping Lily's shoulder. Alex picked Sophie up on instinct. When the cafe door opened, outside air rushed in, along with the eyes of the people waiting. The woman stepped close to Alex, speaking very fast and almost pressing her words to his ear. "Get in the car now." She did not wait for an answer. The car door closed behind Alex with a low, solid sound. That sound echoed inside the enclosed cabin like a small period. Neat, final, needing no emphasis. Alex lifted Sophie and sat down in the back seat, holding her close against his chest. She did not cry, but her whole body stiffened, both hands clutching his shirt. Sophie did not understand what was happening, but her body reacted faster than any explanation. Alex clearly felt each of her quick breaths, each slight tremor passing through the thin fabric. Lily sat close to her mother. The woman placed one hand on her daughter's shoulder, the other resting on her thigh, her fingers clenching and releasing over and over. The car began to move. Through the rear window, the cafe slowly fell back, then disappeared into the flow of people and traffic. Alex watched it for a moment, his mind flashing with the thought that just minutes earlier he had still been standing there. It had still been an ordinary afternoon, and, if he could turn back now, maybe everything would already be different. He told himself he was only going a short distance, just enough to get Sophie out of this dangerous area, just enough to be sure his child was safe. Then he would get out of the car, go home, and close off something he should never have been involved in. That thought helped him slow his breathing a little. It felt like a temporary promise, just enough for him to hold on to during the first few minutes. The car did not go straight. The driver turned left, then right, again and again, looping through streets Alex did not recognize. One turn followed another, with no clear axis. Alex looked out the window, trying to spot a sign, a familiar storefront, but everything passed quickly and chaotically. He realized they were avoiding major roads, avoiding places where they could be easily seen. The sense of being watched did not fade. It spread, covering every curve. "Where are we going?" Alex asked, his voice low, as if afraid of alerting someone outside the car. The woman lifted her head, looking at him through the rearview mirror. "We switch cars first," she said shortly. "We don't stay in this one." Alex was about to ask why, but Sophie squeezed his hand harder. He lowered his head to look at her, saw her eyes wide open, scanning the car interior as if searching for something familiar to cling to. Alex gently rubbed her back, telling her everything was fine, even though he himself was not sure. The car turned into a multi-level parking garage. The space narrowed, the light shifting to the pale yellow of overhead lamps. Just as the car stopped in a hidden corner, a side door suddenly slammed shut, a dry metallic sound ringing out. Alex flinched, turning his head on instinct. "What was that?" he asked. The woman did not turn around. She raised a hand to signal the driver, the motion decisive. "Turn around," she said, as if she had expected this. The car immediately backed out. Alex looked through the window and saw another car appear at the top of the ramp, headlights on. No one got out, no one signaled, just a presence strong enough to force a change of direction. Their car left the garage faster than it had entered, merging back into the street outside. Alex swallowed hard. He began to realize that this was no coincidence, not a random escape. Someone was anticipating every step, every stopping point, and the woman sitting in front was used to that. "You knew they would be there," Alex said, not quite a question. The woman was silent for a few seconds. "I guessed," she replied evenly. "Enough not to stop." On the dashboard, the map was visible. Alex saw the name of a large hotel, its icon bright and clear. He recognized it immediately. A luxurious, well-known place, always with security, cameras, and constant foot traffic. A place anyone would assume was safe. The hotel's name matched the woman's name, printed large, needing no explanation. Alex leaned forward to see more clearly. "There," he said. "If there's a problem, at least it's crowded." The woman glanced at the screen, then swiped it aside. "We don't stop there, East." The sentence came out fast and final, leaving no space for argument. Alex looked at her, for the first time truly studying this woman's face. She was not panicking, not crying, not losing control. Her eyes were clear but tight, like someone accustomed to choosing quickly between bad options. "That's the safest place," Alex said, his irritation impossible to hide. The woman turned and looked straight at him. "Exactly because of that." The car kept moving. As they passed the hotel, Alex looked outside. In front of the entrance, two men stood beside decorative planters. They were not looking at the sign, not looking at guests coming and going. Their eyes were fixed on the road, on the stream of passing cars. One of them lifted a phone, not to his ear, just to look at the screen. Alex felt his heart skip. He turned back to look at the woman in front. She did not look outside. She already knew. "What's your name?" Alex asked, after a heavy silence. "Emma," she answered, this time without evasion. Sophie shifted slightly in his arms, pressing her face into his chest. Alex held her tighter. He began to understand that his initial self-reassuring promise was cracking. This had no clear stopping point. There was no stretch of road marked as finished. The car continued winding. They passed through different neighborhoods, each one with people standing in the wrong places. Too long, too still. Alex began to sense a vague pattern. No devices, no close pursuit, just people. People who were afraid, or people who paid enough to stand still. "Where are you taking us?" Alex asked, his voice low. Emma looked straight ahead. "Away from places I usually stop." That answer sent a chill through Alex. He understood that familiar places, familiar safe points, had all been marked. The trap was not where they were, but in the habits of the one being hunted. The car drove on for a while longer, then merged into heavier traffic. Alex looked outside and saw the city still functioning normally. Pedestrians, motorbikes, traffic lights. No one knew that inside this car, a line had already been crossed. No one knew when. He looked down at Sophie. Her eyes were closed, but her hand was still gripping his shirt. Alex kissed her hair softly, whispering that Dad was here. The words sounded familiar, but this time, he was not sure they were enough. As the car turned onto another street, Alex saw the hotel receding behind them, its lights growing dimmer. The two men at the entrance were still standing there, shrinking in the rearview mirror. Alex watched that image, and in that moment, he understood something very simple and very cruel. The hunter did not need to know where they were, only needed to know that Emma would not stop. The car kept moving through the street, growing darker. Alex held Sophie tight against his chest, feeling her breathing start to quicken. She shifted, rubbed her face into his shirt, then let out a small, tired whimper. Alex patted her back lightly, whispered that it would be over soon, even though he did not know where over was. Lily sat on the other side of the back seat, leaning against her mother, both hands resting on her knees, fingers lacing together, then separating, repeating like a habit to stay calm. The silence in the car stretched on. The driver focused on the road, both hands steady on the wheel. Alex looked into the rearview mirror and saw Emma's eyes fixed forward, unblinking, as if she was watching something only she could see. The city outside was still lit, but inside the car, everything narrowed, heavy, and dense. Alex was the one who broke the silence. "Who are you, that you can't call the police?" he asked directly, his voice low, without detours. The question came out after he had held it in long enough. He was not asking out of curiosity. He was asking because he needed something to hold on to, a reason to justify why he was still sitting in this car. Emma did not answer right away. She let out a long breath, her shoulders dropping very slightly, as if releasing something invisible. The car went on for a few hundred more meters. Traffic lights changed, reflecting on the windshield. Emma looked at that glow, then spoke, her voice dry and even. "Someone inside my system is opening doors." Alex leaned forward a little. "Opening them? For whom?" "For him," Emma replied, without needing to say a name. "For things I thought were already closed." The lusted. Lily turned to look at her mother. Her eyes were different from before, not panicked, not avoiding, but steady, as if waiting for an explanation she knew would not come. Sophie shifted in Alex's arms, let out a short hiccup, then went quiet again. Alex swallowed. "What do you mean?" Emma stayed silent for another beat. When she spoke, her voice was lower, as if weighing each word. "I signed a decision that made one person lose everything." She did not look at Alex. By the law, by procedure, so correct that no one objected. Alex felt his spine go cold. And he said. Emma nodded, very lightly. He chose that. Lily tilted her head, looking at her mother as if at a stranger. You're always busy, she said, her voice small, without blame, just an observation. The sentence dropped into the car like a heavy object. Emma raised her hand, about to fix the stray hair on her daughter's forehead, but her hand shook. She touched Lily's hair for a second, then pulled back, placed her hand on her thigh, and clenched tight. Alex watched that and saw something familiar. An adult standing before the consequences of a choice, and a child standing nearby, not fully understanding, but feeling enough. He turned away, looked out the window, where streetlights slid past in long streaks. You can't call anyone, Alex said, as if confirming. Family, friends, security. Emma shook her head. Those calls go through the same place, she said, and someone there is listening. The driver glanced into the rearview mirror, then looked straight ahead again. No one asked more. The sense that other ears might be waiting on the line made words unnecessary. Alex thought about the phone in his pocket. He had not taken it out. He had not turned it on. Sophie started crying. At first, it was a small whimper. Then it grew, broke apart from exhaustion and fear. Alex bent down, held her tighter, pressed her cheek to his chest. "Dad's here," he said, his voice hoarse. "Dad's here." She clutched his shirt, sobbing, her shoulders shaking with each sharp breath. Sophie's crying tightened something in Alex's chest. He was used to her cries, used to stomach aches, fear of the dark, and tiredness from playing too long. But this cry was different. It carried a fear he did not know how to soothe. He felt helpless, felt that he had brought his child into a place he could not control. Emma turned back, looked at Sophie for a moment. Her eyes softened briefly, then tightened again. "I'm sorry," she said, not clear to whom. Lily shifted closer to her mother, resting her head against her arm. Emma wrapped an arm around her daughter's shoulders, holding tighter this time, as if afraid that loosening her grip would let everything slip away. Alex looked at the two of them, then at Sophie, and for the first time on this drive, he felt that the two children in this car were standing on the same side, a very fragile side. The car slowed, then sped up again. They passed through another neighborhood. Alex began to recognize repeating details. Someone standing too long at a street corner, hands in jacket pockets. A car parked by the curb, interior light on, no one getting out. Another person standing near a bus stop, eyes on the road, not on the schedule. These images linked together, not random, forming a pattern Alex was starting to understand. "No equipment," he said slowly, as if to himself. "Just people." Emma nodded. "And people are cheaper." Alex closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of the park, the swing, and the moment the girl grabbed his hand. He thought of that decision. Fast and instinctive. He had not waited. He had not asked anyone. He had acted on a reflex he once believed was right. The car drove on a little farther. Sophie gradually stopped crying, but her breathing was still uneven. Alex stroked her hair, felt the warm sweat under his palm. He told himself that just a little longer, just enough to get her out of this, then he would stop. That thought appeared again, thinner and weaker than before. Emma stared ahead, her voice lowering. "I'm not running from him," she said. "I'm running from what I created." He said. Alex opened his eyes, looked at her. He understood that this escape had begun before he met Lily, before the park, before this afternoon. He was just someone who stepped into its orbit at a very small point. Sophie shifted, softly calling for her dad. Alex bent down and answered. Lily lifted her head, looked out the window, then turned to her mother, as if wanting to say something, but stopping herself. Emma placed her hand on her daughter's head, this time keeping it there, not pulling back. Alex looked out the window again. The city kept moving, normal, indifferent. He thought of the moment in the park, of turning away, of taking Sophie and leaving right then. The thought flashed sharp and clear as a small cut reopened. What if I had turned away at the park? The car turned into the small street where Alex had lived for many years. Streetlights grew sparse, their light spreading in short patches over the old asphalt. Alex looked out the window, recognizing each familiar roof, each low fence, each parking spot he saw every day. That sense of familiarity should have eased him, but this time, it only made his chest heavier, as if he were bringing something home that did not belong here. The car stopped in front of Alex's small house. The driver turned off the engine but stayed in his seat. Emma looked outside, her gaze scanning slowly and carefully. Lily lifted her head on instinct, looking at the house as if it were an unfamiliar place. Sophie slept limp in Alex's arms, her breathing shallow, her hand still clutching his shirt. "We go in here," Alex said, his voice low. "No one here knows who you are." Emma looked at him and did not object. She nodded once and opened the car door. Alex carried Sophie out first, stepping onto the familiar porch. Lily followed, walking slowly, her eyes never leaving the surroundings. Emma came last, closing the car door, the metallic sound ringing dryly in the quiet space. The house was too silent. No light spilling from the windows, no sound of a neighbor's television drifting over like every other evening. Alex opened the front door and stepped inside, the familiar smell of wood and old soap washing over him. He lay Sophie down on the sofa, pulled a thin blanket over her. She shifted slightly, then went still. "Sit down," Alex said to Emma, pointing to the chair opposite. "I'll check something." Emma nodded, holding Lily's hand and pulling her down to sit. Lily looked around the living room, her gaze lingering on small details, as if trying to memorize the layout. Alex walked into the kitchen and turned on the light. White light flooded the small kitchen where he cooked every night. He stopped at the doorway. The back door was ajar, not the way he always left it. Alex stepped closer, examined the lock. The wood around it bore a fresh scratch, clean and decisive. No sign of struggle, no splintered wood. Just a pry mark deep enough to open the door, light enough to make no sound. Alex stood still for a few seconds. He did not call Emma. He did not go back to the living room. He stepped farther into the kitchen, his eyes quickly scanning the dining table, the sink, the cabinets. Everything was exactly where it should be, too exact. Then he saw the photograph. It lay on the kitchen table, placed neatly, as if someone had carefully considered its position before leaving. The photo was printed on ordinary paper, the edges still slightly curled. Alex picked it up with 2 fingers, his heart pounding so hard he could hear it in his ears. The photo was of Sophie. She was standing in the park, right beside the swing, her face turned slightly, hair lifted by the wind. The frame was close enough to show each fine strand of hair. Alex recognized the moment. He had been standing less than 2 steps away. Below the photo was a handwritten line, black ink, even strokes, unhurried. "You brought in one more. Good." A chill ran down Alex's spine. This did not feel like sudden fear. It felt like a door being opened, revealing a deep void behind it. He understood what he had been avoiding until now. They had not been hunted since getting into the car. They had been seen from the moment he stopped in the park. Alex placed the photo back on the table. His hand trembled, but he kept the movement slow and steady. He returned to the living room. Emma looked up the moment she saw him, recognizing the change on his face before he spoke. "What am I?" she asked. Alex handed her the photo. Emma took it, glanced at it, then clenched the paper tightly in her hand. Lily watched, not fully understanding, but enough to feel the tension spreading from the adults. "They know this house," Emma said, her voice low. "They know your child." Alex nodded. They knew before. He looked at Sophie sleeping on the sofa, then at Lily, sitting close to her mother. In his mind, all the images began to connect. The eyes of the 2 men in the park, the way they waited, the way they did not hurry. He had thought he acted fast, that he pulled the children out of sight, but some sight lines did not require closeness. "I thought this was far enough," Alex said hoarsely. "I thought they were following you." Emma shook her head. "They follow habits," she replied, "and the people who break them." Lily looked up. "Are we staying here?" she asked softly. Emma had not yet answered when Sophie stirred, softly calling for her dad in her sleep. Alex stepped over, knelt by the sofa, and placed his hand on her forehead. Sophie's forehead was warmer than usual. She opened her eyes a little, then closed them again, her hand searching for his shirt. Alex bent down and whispered that Dad was here. But this time, the words felt emptier than ever. He stood up and turned to Emma. "You can't stay here," he said, "but I can't take my child away again." Emma looked at him. "You think they'll let it go if you stop?" Alex did not answer. He looked at the photo again. The short sentence seemed burned into his vision. He had thought he was just helping a lost child. He had thought he could choose to stop at any time. He realized he was wrong on both counts. "You didn't just save someone else," Emma said, her voice low. "You pulled your child in." There was no blame in her words, just the bare truth. Alex closed his eyes for a moment. He thought of the park, of Lily's hand grabbing his, of that brief, pleading look. He thought of Sophie, of the swing, of the promise of cake. He had not turned away. Alex opened his eyes, took a deep breath. "We're not staying here," he he said. But first, I need to lock the door. He walked toward the front door. It was fully dark outside now. Streetlights spilled through the glass, casting long streaks across the floor. Alex reached for the lock. The familiar click sounded, but this time it did not make him feel safer. He turned back, about to say something to Emma, when he heard a faint metallic movement outside the house, very soft but clear in the stillness. Alex froze. The front door opened. The front door opened very softly, as if the person outside was familiar with the house and knew exactly how much force to use. Alex had just turned away from the lock when he saw the man standing right in the doorway. The man did not step inside immediately, did not glance around, just stood still for a beat, long enough for the living room light to fall on his expressionless face. It was not the face of someone hurried or sneaking. It carried the calm of someone who had already prepared the way in, the way out, and the reactions of everyone inside. "Sorry to bother you," the man said, his voice low and even, as if visiting a familiar place. "I'll just come in for a moment." Alex moved to block him on instinct, his heart pounding. "Who are you?" he asked, his voice tense but not raised. The man smiled very slightly, a smile that did not reach his eyes. "Victor," he replied, saying his name as if that alone were enough. Emma pulled Lily close, her hand gripping the girl's shoulder tightly. Lily looked at Victor, eyes wide, caught between curiosity and fear, like a child looking at something adults clearly understood better than she did. Victor stepped over the threshold, his movements neat, not bumping into furniture, not touching anything. Alex felt his house shrink, as if the space had been occupied by something that did not belong here. "How did you get in?" Emma asked, her voice dry. Victor glanced briefly toward the back door, then back at her. "Through doors that stay open," he said. "When the people inside believe they're safe." Alex told Victor to leave, his voice harder this time. Victor looked at him, his gaze pausing for a beat, long enough for Alex to feel himself being weighed. "Calm down," Victor said. "I'm not here to make noise." At that moment, Sophie stirred on the sofa. Alex turned his head on instinct, just for a very brief instant, enough to look at his child. When he turned back, the sofa was empty. Sophie was no longer there. For the first moment, Alex did not understand. His mind went blank. His eyes swept over the place where she had been. Then, to the kitchen, the hallway, the stairs. "Sophie," he called, his voice breaking on the first sound. There was no answer, no footsteps. The house was so silent that the sound of his own rapid breathing rang clearly. Emma let out a short cry, clutching Lily tighter. "Where is she?" she asked, her eyes never leaving Victor. Victor looked at Alex, not at the sofa. "You turned your back a little too long," he said, as if commenting on a technical detail. Alex rushed through the house, checking the stairs, the bathroom, the bedroom, the kitchen. The back door was ajar, and outside was the dark alley, unnaturally quiet. No footprints, no sound. Everything was too clean to make sense. When Alex returned to the living room, his hands were shaking, his breathing ragged, his head spinning from the sudden absence. The phone on the table vibrated. The sound was short and sharp, cutting through the space like a blade. Alex grabbed the phone, the screen showing an unknown number. He answered without thinking. "You hear it now." Victor's voice came from the other end, calm, as if speaking from very far away. Alex looked up at Victor, standing in front of him. Victor raised his hand and flicked open a small lighter. The familiar sound clicked, then stopped, then clicked again, slow and even, like a counting rhythm. Alex felt his legs weaken. "Where is my child?" he shouted, his voice completely breaking, his throat burning. On the other end, Victor clicked the lighter once more. "Listen carefully," he said. "I didn't take your child." Alex shook his head, without realizing he was doing it. "She disappeared right in front of me," he snarled. "What did you do to her?" Victor let out a light breath, as if the question did not surprise him. "True," he said, "but not because I took her." Emma stepped forward, her voice tightly controlled. "What do you want?" she asked. Victor turned to her, his eyes lighting slightly, as if finally addressed at the center of things. "I want you to come with me," he said, "alone." Alex turned to Emma. "Don't listen to him," he said, but his voice had already lost its firmness. The lighter clicked again. Click, click. 3 minutes, Victor said. "Bring Emma to me. Alone." Lily clutched her mother's clothes, her voice trembling. "Mom." Emma bent down and held her, her hands shaking but gripping tightly. She looked up at Alex, her eyes mixed with fear and forced acceptance. Alex looked at them, then at the place where Sophie had been. That emptiness seemed to be swallowing the room, If I don't? Alex asked into the phone, his voice hoarse. Then what? Victor was silent for a beat. The lighter stopped. You've seen enough, he replied. Alex tightened his grip on the phone. You said you didn't take my child, he said. So where is she? Victor answered immediately, without hesitation. Somewhere safer than this house. Alex let out a short laugh, the sound escaping like a painful reflex. You call that safe? Safe for my purpose, Victor replied. And for your choice is not. Alex looked at Emma, then at Lily, then at the empty sofa. Images of the park, the swing, Lily's hand grabbing his, Sophie's laughter that afternoon, all crashed together at once. Victor repeated the time, his tone unchanged. 3 minutes. Alex raised a hand to his face, rubbing hard, as if trying to erase the scene in front of him. Leave my child alone, he said, his voice low. What else do you want? The lighter clicked again, steady and familiar, calm to the point of cruelty. I didn't take your child, Victor said slowly. You gave her to me the moment you chose to help someone else. Alex stood still, the phone pressed to his ear. Victor stood in front of him, his gaze unbroken, as if waiting for him to fully understand. The house was silent. Emma held Lily. The sofa was empty. You gave her to me the moment you chose to help someone else. Alex does not remember how he opened the car door. He only remembers the feeling of his hand gripping the metal edge of the door, cold and slick, as if letting go would make everything collapse instantly. Sophie was no longer there to ask questions or cry. The space behind him was large enough for every thought to rush straight through without resistance. Alex turned to Emma, his eyes no longer able to hold even the smallest trace of restraint. If you want my kid to live, then go, he said, his voice hoarse and low, not shouting, not begging, just an order bursting out of fear that had already overflowed. Emma paused for a beat. She did not resist. She did not ask questions. She only looked at Alex, then nodded once, slowly. How many minutes did he give? She asked, her voice tired, as someone used to questions with no good answers. Alex did not reply right away. He opened the car door and motioned for Emma to get in first. Lily stood beside her mother, her eyes flicking briefly toward the darkness ahead, then back to Alex. She did not cry. She did not ask where Sophie was. She only looked at her mother for a long moment, as if waiting for something Emma did not say. Emma placed a hand on Lily's shoulder, gently steadying her, then guided her into the back seat. Alex slammed the door harder than necessary, metal striking with a dry, blunt sound. The car pulled away. No one spoke during the first few minutes. The city slid backward, streetlights stretching into long streaks across the glass. Alex sat in the front seat, back straight, hands resting on his knees, trembling slightly. His phone vibrated in his pocket. He took it out, the screen showing a set of coordinates. No name, no message attached. Victor did not need to explain. Alex knew it was the meeting point. Construction site, he said briefly, holding the screen so Emma could glance at it. Emma looked quickly, then nodded. Abandoned, she said. That fits him. Lily leaned back in the rear seat, both hands resting on her thighs. She looked through the gap between the front seats, her gaze stopping at the back of her mother's neck. There was no anger, no panic, only a very deep silence. Alex caught that look in the rearview mirror, then turned away. He could not bear the feeling of being seen through by a child. The car turned onto the road, leading toward the old industrial zone. Houses grew sparse on either side. Faded billboards slid past in the darkness. Alex began to understand that they were heading toward a place outside ordinary life, a place wide enough that no one would hear, messy enough for anything to look like an accident. Emma spoke after a long stretch of silence. He doesn't need money, she said softly, eyes fixed ahead. Alex tilted his head, waiting. He needs me to sign, Emma continued, her voice even but dry. Sign to admit that my decisions crushed other people's lives. Alex closed his eyes for a moment. He pictured documents, signatures, closed meetings, and decisions labeled as proper procedure. He did not need the details. He only needed to know that what Victor wanted was not in a safe or a bank account. He wants us to dirty our own hands, Alex said, as a conclusion. Emma did not respond, but her silence was confirmation enough. The car kept moving. Lily shifted slightly, resting her head against the back of the front seat. She still did not cry. Alex noticed that and felt his chest tighten. Children cry when they still believe adults can fix things. Silence is when they begin to accept that some things cannot be fixed. She knows. Alex said, not sure whether he was speaking to Emma or to himself. Emma tightened her grip on the steering wheel. She's always known, she replied. She's just waiting for me to say it. As a prize. Alex did not ask Emma why she had let things go this far. He did not ask why she had not stopped sooner. Those questions had become meaningless. The rules had been reset, and he was standing in the middle of them, with no right to refuse. The phone vibrated again. Not a call, just a location confirmation. They were on the correct route. Victor was tracking every meter. Alex imagined that calm gaze, the familiar click of a lighter, the cold rhythm of counting time. He realized Victor did not need to be present to control the situation. His presence already covered every decision. The car left the main road and entered a narrow path. Streetlights grew sparse, then vanished entirely. Ahead, darkness opened up, wide and deep. Emma slowed, the car rolling forward carefully. Alex looked around and saw low concrete buildings, unfinished scaffolding, and steel frames rising like the ribs of something never completed. Here, Emma said quietly. The car stopped. The engine shut off. For the first moment, there was only the sound of cooling metal. Alex opened the door and stepped out. The air was cold and damp. He looked up, staring into the space ahead. Construction lights flicked on in clusters, not all at once, as if someone were testing switches. White light spilled over the uneven ground, creating patches of brightness and shadow. Alex stood still. He understood this was not a rescue point. This was a place of judgment, a stage already set, where every choice would be seen. The car sat before the dark construction site. The lights came on in clusters, like a prepared stage. The construction lights cast down scattered patches of brightness, leaving deep shadows between concrete blocks and unfinished scaffolding. The wind blew hard, carrying the smell of metal and damp earth. Alex took a few more steps, his eyes adjusting to the space ahead, and then he saw Sophie. She stood at the edge of a high scaffold, behind her nothing but dark open air. No one was holding her hand. No one was touching her. There was only a man standing a few steps away, close enough to block her path, far enough that he did not need to use force. The wind whipped Sophie's hair into disorder, her thin jacket fluttering with each gust. She was not crying. She stood still, arms hanging at her sides, eyes wide open, as if trying to understand why she was here. Alex froze. His chest tightened so hard his breath stalled halfway. He wanted to rush forward, to call her name, but his feet felt pinned to the ground. One wrong step now could push everything beyond what he could endure. On the opposite side, Lily stood beside a large concrete pillar. A hand rested lightly on her shoulder, not gripping, not forcing, just enough to remind her that someone was there. Lily turned to look at Sophie, then back at her mother. Her eyes trembled, lips pressed tight, as if struggling not to cry. Victor stepped out from the darkness between the two children. He walked slowly, unhurried, his shoes crunching on gravel with dry sounds. In his hand was a thin stack of papers, neatly clipped. Victor stopped in the middle of the space, where the light was brightest, as if standing exactly where it had been planned. "It's wide enough here?" Victor said calmly, as if commenting on a construction site. "Wide enough for everything to look like an accident if needed." Emma stood beside Alex, her shoulders rigid. She looked at Sophie first, then at Lily. Each time her gaze settled on one child, her expression shifted slightly, as if two lines of thought were colliding at once. Victor took one more step forward and held the papers out toward Emma. "Sign," he said simply. "Everything ends." Emma looked down at the stack of papers in Victor's hand. The white pages stood out under the lights, edges straight, uncreased, as if never handled in haste. She reached out to take them, her movement slow and heavy. Alex saw her hand tremble slightly when it touched the paper. "What is this?" Alex asked, his voice hoarse. Victor did not look at him. "The truth," he replied. "What she did, under the name of proper procedure." Emma did not open the papers. She knew what was in them. She had read documents like this her entire life. She had just never been forced to sign them under circumstances like this. Victor took out his phone and placed it on a low concrete block. The screen lit up, showing a countdown timer. The numbers began to move. "Time starts now," Victor said. "I don't like dragging things out." Alex looked at the timer, then at Sophie. She shifted her foot slightly, as if losing balance in the wind. The man behind her leaned with her movement, not touching, just enough to let her know she could not step back. "Don't," Alex said, his voice breaking, not clear who he was speaking to. Victor glanced at him. You should save that word for a more useful moment. Lily burst into tears. At first, the sound caught in her throat, then broke into a cry. Mom! She called, her voice shaking, high and rushed, echoing across the wide space. It was not loud, but it cut through wind and metal, and struck straight into Emma. Emma spun around. She rushed toward Lily on instinct, so fast she nearly stumbled. She dropped to her knees and wrapped her arms tightly around her child. The hug was so tight that Lily let out a small cry of pain. Be quiet, Emma snapped, her voice higher than usual. Look at me? The words had barely left her mouth when Emma froze, but she did not loosen her grip. She held Lily close, as if letting go for even a second would make her disappear. Lily sobbed, face pressed into her mother's shoulder, hands clutching her clothes. Alex stood still, watching. He saw a mother who had lost control, a woman used to holding everything together, now clinging to the only thing she could touch. It was not a beautiful scene. It was raw, selfish, deeply human. Emma, Alex called softly. She did not turn around. Victor watched everything with quiet amusement. He bent down to look at the timer, then straightened. Time is still running, he said. You can hug your child, but the pen is still in your hand. Emma looked up, eyes red. She looked at Sophie. Alex followed her gaze and saw his daughter standing alone at the edge of the scaffold, the wind growing stronger. A gust made Sophie wobble. The man behind her shifted half a step closer. Don't touch my child, Alex growled. Victor chuckled softly. You see, he said, I haven't needed to. Emma stood up, still holding Lily for a moment, then released her very slowly. Lily clutched at her mother's clothes, unwilling to let go. Emma peeled her fingers away, her eyes shaking but hardening. She walked toward Alex, the papers still in her hand. We don't have a choice, Emma said, her voice hoarse, as if speaking to herself. Alex looked at her. We do, he replied. There's always one. Emma shook her head. Not the kind you think. Victor stepped closer, near enough for the pressure to be unmistakable. 2 children, he said, pointing to each side. 1 signature. I don't need to explain more. The countdown timer made a small sound as it ticked to the next mark. Lily looked at her mother again, tears streaming. Sophie looked toward Alex, eyes wide, lips moving as if trying to call out, but no sound came. Alex felt his heart pounding out of control. He looked at the 2 children, at the papers in Emma's hand, at Victor standing between them, like the moderator of a filthy game. He began to understand what Victor truly wanted. Not the signature, not the money, but this moment, the moment they were forced to face their own choice. Victor smiled thinly. Choose fast, he said evenly. I don't like waiting. Tom. Victor turned very slowly, as if drawing out the moment before saying the most important thing. He looked at Sophie, then at Lily, then let his gaze settle on Alex. You decide, Victor said, his voice even, not loud, not emphasized. The sentence fell onto the windless construction ground, resting between the 2 children like a heavy object no one wanted to pick up. Alex felt his chest being squeezed tight. He turned to look at Sophie first. She stood at the edge of the scaffold, the wind stronger than before, her hair blown across part of her face. Sophie's eyes were wide, fixed on Alex, as if searching for a familiar anchor. Her lips moved, no sound coming out. Alex realized she was trying to stay calm the way children do when adults tell them everything will be fine. He turned to Lily. She stood on the opposite side, the man's hand still resting lightly on her shoulder, close enough to remind her she could not run. Lily looked at her mother first, then at Alex. Her eyes were not like Sophie's. They were not asking for help. They looked like they were waiting for a final confirmation, an apology that had never been said. Alex stood in the middle, the distance to each child the same, but the feeling was sharply uneven. He heard his heartbeat in his ears, fast and chaotic. In his head, images overlap. Sophie on the swing, Lily grabbing his hand in the park, the photograph on the kitchen table, Victor's words in the dark house. Everything collapsed inward, forcing him into a very narrow point. Emma stood beside him, pen in hand. Her hand was shaking visibly, fingers curling and uncurling. She looked down at the stack of papers, as if staring long enough might make the words disappear. A tear fell onto the first page, leaving a blurred stain. Emma wiped at it quickly, but the paper was already wet. Don't, Alex said, his voice hoarse, unclear whether he was speaking to Emma or to himself. Victor tilted his head, watching. Time, he reminded them, pointing at the phone. The countdown continued, each second passing clearly, coldly. Alex looked back at Sophie. She shifted her foot slightly, trying to keep her balance. A familiar fear surged up in him, the fear of a father watching his child stand too close to something that could hurt her. That fear was so familiar, it automatically pushed aside every other thought. "Alex?" Emma called softly, her voice breaking. "I don't know what to do." Alex turned to look at her. He saw Emma's face now completely different from the woman in the cafe, different from the woman in the car, with the steady voice. This was the face of a mother backed into a corner, all layers of control stripped away. In that moment, Alex saw how much he and Emma resembled each other, more than he wanted to admit. Victor stepped forward one pace. "You can save your child," he said, his tone light, as if suggesting something reasonable. "Just let her sign." Alex heard those words clearly. They went straight into a part of him that was ready to hear them. He did not turn to look at Lily. He did not want to see her eyes one more time. Alex reached out and grabbed Emma's wrist. The grip was hard and sudden, pulling her back one step. Emma flinched, looked up at him. Alex leaned closer, his voice pressed down low and rough. "Sign." The word came out before he could stop it. Short, bare, without explanation. Emma froze. The pen in her hand shook harder. Lily saw it, her eyes widening, but Alex still did not turn back. He could not bear to face the consequences at this moment. A silence dropped over the construction site. The wind still blew. Metal creaked faintly, but no one spoke. The silence was long enough for everyone to understand what had just happened. Long enough for an observer to hate Alex. Long enough for Alex to hear his own thoughts clearly. In that moment, Alex hated himself. He saw exactly what he had just done. He had placed another child on the scale in exchange for his own. Victor did not need to say anything more. No one had to force him. He himself had pulled Emma into that position. He himself had pushed Lily out of his line of sight. "Alex?" Emma said again, this time lower, almost pleading. Alex tightened his grip for a brief second, then let go. He turned his face away, eyes fixed on the ground, unable to look at Sophie, unable to look at Lily. Shame and fear mixed, making him want to disappear from this moment entirely. Victor smiled very slightly. "Good," he said, as if seeing exactly what he had been waiting for. "Now we're being realistic." Emma lowered her gaze to the papers. Her hand was still shaking, but the tremors gradually grew smaller, as if her body had begun to accept something unavoidable. Lily took a very small step forward, but the man behind her placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, holding her back. Lily looked at her mother, lips moving, no sound coming out. Alex heard his own breathing. Each inhale and exhale felt heavy. He thought about running to Sophie, about rushing Victor, about doing anything else at all. But those thoughts came too late, after the word had already been spoken. Emma raised the pen. The tip touched the paper lightly. A brief second passed, longer than all the seconds before it. Emma put the pen down on the page. The moment Emma's pen touched the paper had not yet become a complete action when Alex was no longer looking at her hand. His gaze was locked onto Sophie. Under the harsh, cold construction lights, the girl's face was revealed with brutal clarity. Sophie was deathly pale, not the kind of fear that makes children scream, but a fear that had gone too far, where the body automatically shuts down every response, just to survive. Her lips were pressed tight, dry. Her eyes were wide, but empty, not shimmering with tears. Alex had seen that look before, in hospitals, on nights when Sophie's fever was so high she no longer had the strength to cry. It was the moment adults often mistake for calm, but in truth, it was when a child had been forced into silence. The sight stole Alex's breath. Victor did not need to remind him. The clock did not need to keep counting. A hot, cold surge ran along Alex's spine, exactly like the feeling of realizing you have crossed a line without noticing. He looked at Emma, at the pen in her hand, at Lily standing opposite with a tear-soaked face but eyes already drained, then back at Sophie. In that instant, everything lined up. Alex saw clearly where he was standing, and that if he let things continue even one more beat, the person left at the end would no longer be him. Alex released Emma's hand. The movement was quick and decisive, almost reflexive. Emma's wrist, just moments before clutched as a final anchor, was now empty. Alex stepped back once, then another step, as if he had touched something burning. In his head rang clearly the words he had just forced Emma into. the words that had placed another child on the scale in exchange for his own. The disgust rose, clogging his throat. He could not remain in that position for another second. Alex turned to Victor. "Take me," he said, his voice hoarse and low, not shouting, not pleading. "Don't take them." The words came out without any heroic shape. They were not prepared. They were not noble. They came from a very ugly place in him, one that had just been exposed to the light and made him unable to endure himself. Alex did not think about the consequences. He only knew that if he did not say those words, if he let everything continue along this filthy momentum, the one standing here at the end would be someone he despised. Victor looked at Alex longer than before. His gaze slowed, as if savoring an interesting detail. Then he let out a soft laugh. The lighter clicked, short and dry, familiar enough to make Alex nauseous. "Too late," Victor said, his voice calm, like announcing a missed train. Alex stepped toward Sophie on instinct. "Don't," he said, his voice breaking. "Don't pull her into this." Victor tilted his head, his eyes sliding over Sophie and returning to Alex. "You already pulled her in," he said. "I'm just making sure the story reaches its end." He gave a very small signal, a lazy motion of the hand. The man standing near Sophie shifted. He did not touch her yet. He only stepped half a step closer. That small distance was enough to make Sophie step back on instinct. Her heel brushed the edge of the scaffold. Metal rang out with a thin, sharp sound. "Sophie!" Alex called, his voice completely breaking. He lunged forward on instinct, but Victor stepped sideways, placing himself exactly in the way. No need to touch Alex, no need to push, just standing there, precisely placed. "Slow down," Victor said evenly. "You don't want things to get worse." Emma stood frozen. The pen slipped from her hand, rolled across the concrete, then stopped. Lily let out a short cry, then quickly clamped her hand over her mouth, as if afraid of doing something wrong. "Mom!" she called, her voice cracking. Emma spun to look at Lily, then at Sophie. Two children at opposite ends of the space, and she stood between them, both hands empty, with nothing left to hold. Alex felt his head spinning. He had just done what he thought was right, but the board had not changed. Victor did not need that sacrifice. Victor needed this moment to stretch longer, needed them to watch themselves doing this to who they were. "Time's up," Victor said. "You hesitated." "No," Alex snarled. "I said, take me." Victor smiled faintly. "I heard you," he replied. He signaled again. This time, the man behind Sophie did not keep his distance. A hand landed on her shoulder, firm. Sophie jerked. Her small body tilted. She tried to grab the metal bar beside her, her fingers sliding on the cold, slick surface. Alex lunged. The moment lasted less than a second, but in Alex's mind, it stretched into infinity. There was a tiny, deeply human beat where he hesitated, not from fear of Victor, not from fear of being shot or restrained, but because in that beat, a filthy thought flashed. If he lunged, Lily would lose her mother. If he did not, Sophie would lose her father. That thought existed for less than 1,000th of a second, but it was enough to slow his body. Half a second. That half second was enough for the other hand to yank Sophie harder. She lost her balance completely. Metal screeched as the scaffold shook violently. Wind roared up, cold and vicious, tipping the small body toward the open void. "Sophie!" Alex screamed, his voice shattering. He reached out, missing by a tiny distance, just a few inches, but enough for everything to slip beyond control. That missed grasp slammed into his chest, cold and hollow, like a sentence passed without explanation. Victor stood still, watching with clear, icy eyes, as if this were the moment he had been waiting for all along. Sophie was yanked hard toward the edge of the scaffold. The scaffold shook violently the moment Sophie was yanked toward the edge. The screech of metal grinding against metal rang out sharply, echoing across the wide space of the construction site like a series of delayed warnings. In the next instant, the construction lights went out, abruptly, without order, without warning. Darkness crashed down, swallowing the shapes that had just been clearly visible. Alex felt his heart drop with the light. He lunged forward on instinct, arms reaching into the dark, his mind so empty he could not even call his daughter's name. Metal clattered all around them. A steel beam fell somewhere, striking concrete with a deep, hollow sound. Wind tore through the open space, carrying dust and the smell of oil. Alex's hand caught the fabric, Sophie's shirt, his fingers closed, gripping hard, pulling her toward him. Her body slammed lightly into his chest, so light it terrified him that he might have been too late. Sophie let out a short breath, did not cry, did not call out, only curled inward, hands clutching his shirt, as if clinging to the last thing that still existed. Another violent jolt tipped the scaffold. Alex lost his footing, slid, but kept Sophie locked in his arms. He twisted, his back slamming into a steel pillar, pain flaring. In the darkness, he heard running footsteps, ragged breathing, and someone shouting briefly before cutting off. Everything overlapped, boundaries dissolving. Elsewhere, Emma lunged on instinct, not from calculation, not from weighing outcomes. When the light vanished, when Sophie tipped, Emma's body moved before thought could form. She shoved forward hard, all force driving through her shoulder and arm. Victor was knocked back, losing balance. In that brief moment, no one heard him speak. No one clearly saw his face. There was only impact and the void opening behind him. No one turned back to see how Victor fell. Alex did not know what Emma had done. He did not know whether Victor was still standing or had gone down. He only knew Sophie was in his arms, light and trembling, and the scaffold continued to shudder as if about to collapse. He turned, crouched low, and ran toward what he thought was the exit. His foot snagged on a cable, nearly sending him down, but he kept his balance by twisting, shielding Sophie. His hands shook uncontrollably, fingers rigid with the fear that letting go would mean losing her again. "I'm here," he said hoarsely, close to Sophie's ear. She did not answer, only tightened her grip. A small explosion sounded behind them. Not loud, but enough to change the air. Fire caught in a corner of the site where tarps and abandoned materials lay. Flames flared fast, licking at fabric edges, a weak orange light tearing open a patch of darkness. Smoke began to billow, thick and acrid, burning Alex's eyes. Emma emerged in the firelight, dragging Lily with her. Lily ran, breath short, feet unsteady, but she did not cry. Emma gripped her hand, pulled her close, head lowered to avoid the smoke. "Move," she said shortly, her voice compressed. Lily nodded and followed, her eyes still darting back toward the darkness where familiar shapes had vanished. They ran in the same direction, without calling out, without questions. Alex led, guided by a vague memory of the entrance. Each step carried the vibration of metal underfoot, the weight of breath hammering in his chest. Smoke thickened, air growing heavy. Alex felt his lungs burn with every inhale, but he did not slow. Sophie in his arms was so light, it filled him with fear and gratitude at once. A piece of metal dropped ahead, blocking the path. Alex veered, circled, slammed into another steel frame. Pain flared in his shoulder, but he did not release his hold. Emma pressed Lily tight against the wall, waited for Alex to pass, then ran again. No one spoke more than a word. Speech had no use now. They saw light ahead, the exit hazy through smoke. Alex gathered what little strength remained and ran harder. When they burst clear of the scaffolding, cold air hit his face, leaving him momentarily dizzy. He stopped, bent double, gasping. Sophie still locked in his arms. Emma stopped behind him, still holding Lily's hand. They stood for several seconds, breathing hard, silent. Behind them, flames surged higher, reflecting off steel frames like blades of light. Smoke rose, slowly erasing what remained of the site. Alex looked at Sophie. She lifted her head, eyes wide, still not crying. He touched her cheek lightly, felt warmth. Only then did he realize how violently his hands were shaking. He had to tighten his grip, use his whole arm to keep her from trembling with him. Emma looked at Lily. The girl stood still, shoulders lifting with each breath, eyes red but dry. Emma pulled her into her chest, held her tight. No apology, no promises. She simply held her, like something that had nearly slipped away forever. "Go!" Alex said hoarsely after catching his breath. He did not look back. He did not ask where Victor was. He did not ask who was alive. Those questions had no place now. They left the construction site, moving fast across the open ground toward the road. Streetlights appeared ahead, weak but familiar. Distant traffic noise, the city returning, indifferent, unaware of what had just happened. Alex set Sophie into the back seat when they reached the car. She sat there, back against the seat, eyes still open, staring forward. Alex sat beside her, placed a hand on her thigh, holding it still, as if needing proof she was here. Emma settled Lily into the back seat beside Sophie. Lily glanced over. The two children met eyes for a brief moment. No words, only the presence of another child, alive. The car rolled forward. Alex stayed in the back, one hand on Sophie's shoulder, the other gripping the seat edge to steady himself. Emma drove, hands tight on the wheel, eyes fixed ahead. Lily sat quietly, head resting against the seatback, breathing gradually, evening out. When the construction site disappeared behind them, Alex finally allowed his breathing to slow. A fragile sense of safety crept in, just enough to keep him upright. He looked out the window, city lights sliding past, as if this night were no different from any other. "Are you okay?" he asked Sophie softly. Sophie nodded faintly. "Don't let go," she said, her voice rough. Alex tightened his grip. "I'm here." Emma heard but did not turn. She kept driving, did not slow down, did not change direction. Lily leaned her head gently against Sophie's shoulder, exhausted. Sophie did not pull away. The two children sat close, finding a shared anchor in a night that had gone on too long. No one spoke of Victor. No one asked what happened after the shove. No one mentioned the burning construction site behind them. Those questions hung in the air, untouched. The car kept moving, leaving the fire behind, leaving the darkness. But no one looked back, not because they were afraid to see it, but because they understood the hunt did not end there. It was almost dawn. The city showed a pale gray tone, not quite day, no longer night. The car moved more slowly, as if even the person driving needed time to be sure she was still here. Streetlights went dark in sections, giving way to weak natural light filtering through the windshield. Alex sat in the back seat, his back against the door, one arm wrapped around Sophie, holding her close to his chest. Sophie was asleep. Her body had gone limp after the long stretch of tension, her head tilted toward Lily. Lily was also asleep, her breathing steady and light, her forehead resting against Sophie's shoulder like a habit that had just formed. The two children leaned into each other naturally, as if they had known each other for a long time, as if this world only needed a point of support small enough to keep them from drifting away. Alex looked at the scene and felt his chest tighten. He reached out and adjusted the thin jacket on Sophie's shoulder, afraid a stronger movement would wake her. Emma sat in the front seat, both hands gripping the steering wheel. Her knuckles were white from the pressure. She did not look at the rearview mirror. She did not look toward Alex. Her eyes stayed fixed on the road ahead, where the light was slowly becoming clearer. Each time the car jolted slightly over uneven pavement, her shoulders tensed, as if letting go of the wheel would make everything collapse at once. Alex lowered his head and rested his chin on the top of Sophie's head. The warmth from her body spread into him, real and close. The feeling was both salvation and sentence. Salvation, because his child was still here, still breathing, still sleeping. Sentence, because he knew exactly the price of this moment. He had crossed a line he once believed he never would, and even though he had turned back at the last second, the footprints were still there. The car turned onto a quieter road. The early morning city felt falsely calm. Shops were closed. A few early pedestrians walked with heads down, no one paying attention to the car passing by. Alex looked out the window and saw a faint reflection of himself. His face looked more hollow than it had a few hours earlier, as if he had aged several years in a single night. "Are you okay?" Emma asked quietly, without turning around. Alex missed a beat before answering. "I'm still breathing," he said. It was the only answer he was sure of. Emma nodded very slightly, as if accepting it. She did not ask more. Some questions would shatter the fragile balance they were clinging to. Lily shifted in her sleep, her head moving a little closer against Sophie's shoulder. Sophie moved with her, then went still again. Alex looked at the two children and felt as if an invisible thread had just been tied between them, without promises, without explanations. He wondered whether they would remember anything about this night later on, or whether it would remain only as a deep blur, something unnamed. The car stopped at a small roadside parking area. Emma turned off the engine. The motor fell silent, leaving a quiet so complete that Alex could hear his own breathing. The sky was a little brighter now. Light fell across the dashboard, the steering wheel, and the rearview mirror. Emma remained still, hands on the wheel, not letting go. "What do we do now?" Alex asked, not because he needed a plan immediately, but because he needed to break the silence that had been building too long. Emma stared straight ahead. "I need time," she said. "And so do you." Alex nodded. He did not know whether time would help, but he understood they could not keep running like this forever. He looked down at Sophie and saw her eyelashes flutter slightly. He kissed her hair very softly, very quickly, like a silent confirmation. Emma's phone rang. The sound was too sharp in the quiet car. Emma flinched slightly, then glanced at the screen. An unknown number. She hesitated for a second, then put it on speaker instead of lifting it to her ear. Alex straightened, instinctively tense. "Emma?" A voice came through. Young, clear, cold. There was no lighter click, none of Victor's familiar slowness. This voice went straight to the point, like reading from a prepared notice. Victor was just the noise. Emma did not answer. She stared ahead, her grip tightening. Alex held his breath. The plan did not die with him. The voice continued, even and emotionless. "You did your part. Now the consequences begin." His action. Alex felt Sophie stir slightly in his arms, but she did not wake. Lily slept on. The children did not hear those words. The adults heard them very clearly. "Who are you?" Emma asked, her voice dry. The voice did not answer directly. "We will contact you again," it said. "Next time, there will not be so many choices." The call ended. The disconnect tone was short and clean, leaving a heavy emptiness inside the car. Emma lowered the phone and placed it on her thigh. She did not say anything else. Neither did Alex. Neither needed to explain that Victor had never been the destination. He had only been loud enough to hide the rest. Alex looked up at the rearview mirror on instinct. In the small mirror, he saw a faint reflection of the road behind them. Low buildings, dark windows. Then, his eyes stopped. On the roof of a building across the street, a figure stood still, far enough away that no face could be seen. Just the shape of a person, standing very straight, very still, as if they had been there before the car ever stopped. The figure did not move, did not signal, just stood there. Alex opened his mouth to speak, but before a sound could come out, a dry noise cracked through the air. A gunshot. The sound was not loud, not drawn out. It came once, clean and precise. The rearview mirror shattered directly in front of Alex's eyes, cracks spreading like a spiderweb, catching the pale morning light in warped fragments. Alex ducked on instinct, pulling Sophie tighter, his body locking up. Sophie let out a sharp breath, but did not fully wake. Lily shifted slightly, frowning in her sleep. Emma slammed the accelerator on instinct, the car jerking forward and surging away. The broken mirror vibrated, fractured glass, reflecting the brightening sky in jagged lines. No one spoke. Alex held Sophie in his arms, his heart racing. In that moment, he understood the most brutal truth. He was not being punished for doing something wrong. He was being punished for doing the right thing. And the consequence did not come immediately, did not come loudly, but followed patiently, waiting for the moments that felt almost safe. The car left the quiet road and merged back into the waking city. Behind them, the buildings slipped out of view. The figure on the roof was no longer visible in the shattered mirror, but the feeling of being seen remained, whole and intact, like a shadow that did not need a shape. Alex lowered his head and whispered into Sophie's hair, very softly, "Dad's here." He did not know whether he was saying it to his child or to himself, and he knew one thing clearly. This was not over. It had just begun. Alex's story is not about a hero, nor does it glorify a clean victory. It raises a much harder question. When you do the right thing, are you ready to pay the price for its consequences? Alex does only one very human thing, helping a child who has lost her mother. But from that moment on, he is pulled into a chain of choices with no clean answers, where morality, family, and fear collide in a raw and unfiltered way. The lesson here is not, don't help others. On the contrary, the story forces us to face the truth that what is right is not always protected, and its consequences are sometimes borne by the innocent. Society runs on systems, power, and interests, and within those cracks, the person who does the right thing can become a target, not a hero. This story invites each of us to ask ourselves, if you were in Alex's position, what would you do? And would you dare to face the ugly part of yourself when forced to choose? If this story made you think, share it so others can learn from it as well. Thank you for following along, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel to continue with stories ahead that are deep, sharp, and full of meaning.